You have reached the Local Maximum, episode 207.
Time to expand your perspective. Welcome to the Local Maximum. Now, here's your host, Max Sklar.
Welcome back, everybody. You have reached another Local Maximum. This is Aaron, and I am here with returning triumphantly. Can I say triumphantly?
I'm back. Yes.
Max is back.
I guess you'd call it triumphantly. That was a pretty good intro. I think we could do a little bit with a little bit more excitement, a little bit more energy. Come on. No, I have to do this for myself. I need to keep high energy. But yes, I am back. I've been through some pretty intense surgery, some pretty okay recovery, and New Year's I need a haircut, but I am back. So that is good to see. As you could see, I'm healthy. I am mobile. That was never going to be a problem, but I don't know. I'm not going to do a little dance and stuff, but be assured I can.
So no. I guess we're not on the couch, so you can't jump up off the couch.
Yeah.
Morning talk show style.
Yeah, no, I could. I'm not going to do exercises or whatever. They get the point.
But you're doing well.
Yeah.
And we've burned through the entire backlog of interviews that you stacked up before that happened. But,
we've burned through the entire backlog and more. And yes, that was me doing the solo show last week, which I think came out okay, all things considering, but I was in Connecticut because, considering everything going on with me, unfortunately, my grandmother passed away right as I was recovering from the surgery. So I went into Connecticut for the funeral, and it's like, end that one thing and then start the other thing without even missing a beat, where it was like, it's almost like everyone forgot what I was going through, because then we had this other thing to go through, which was a very big deal because, she's been with us a long time, and I would go over there a lot. And yeah, it was kind of a big deal. And it's been kind of, I feel like every few weeks it's something else.
Yeah, well, that's certainly never easy, and it does feel a little bit like we're jumping from crisis to crisis, even without the personal stuff. That just the last 2 years has felt like that,
right?
And
right.
that piles on top of it. But
right.
But we're here to bring a little maybe a little levity in today, and some knowledge.
I think so. But before we do, I'll dedicate today's episode to my grandmother, who was Dorothy Marks, born Dorothy Gershon. And I just want to show this really cool photo that I found. So I'm kind of like the family archivist. And so I one thing you don't want to do when it's someone's funeral and they're 92 years old, and this was a problem that we started to notice, is you don't want to have all the pictures of them from ages, 80, 87 and up. Which is what happens a lot. So it's like, I want to keep old photos.
Shots of them in their prime.
Yeah, in their prime. Or we had a lot of shots with my grandmother, my grandfather when they passed away, of maybe not, maybe they were older, but still like 10, 15 years ago when they were like, healthy, and they were healthy into old age. But this is a really cool one that I found. This is what the New York Post looked like in March 1947. I can see, maybe we could put it up on the screen there. So for those of you who are watching on video, but this is my grandmother right here, second from the left. And this is at Queens College. She was first year at Queens College that year. So that was pretty cool. And it's weird because the bottom picture looks like normal kind of teenagers, and the top picture is like they are figuring out how to divide up Germany, I think, apparently. So the New York Post must have been so different back then. See, it's 10 cents. So I thought that was really cool. And then episode 199, we did how AI can be used to color and upscale photos. So I put it through a few filters, and I ended up with this picture just from that little clip of newspaper.
Which is impressive, because even today, the quality of images in newspapers is not phenomenal because of the techniques they use
Yeah,
for the
you
actual
could see
printing.
the little holes and dots. I wonder if an algorithm can be written that fixes the dots situation.
I would imagine there could be, but
it's probably not even need AI.
The tool you used probably wasn't specifically targeting that yet. Yeah,
it kind of looks like my mom. It's funny, but no, it's very good. It's so weird because it's like, I don't know if that's exactly right because they're filling in the gaps. So is that really you? Is kind of I thought would be is kind of an interesting question.
Well, not the topic that we're talking about today, but human memory, I'm led to believe, does not work that dissimilarly. That
right.
When we go back and remember things, and at a more fundamental level, human eyesight as well. That our brains, when they're capturing an image, not just filling in our literal blind spot, but that our brains are filling in a lot of the gaps to create a smoother and more complete image in our minds.
Yeah, and that would actually be an interesting show. I don't know a whole lot about how the brain works. I know a lot about how machine learning works, and I know where it's taken inspiration from what neuroscientists tell us how the brain might work, but I don't know if that's how the brain actually works.
Yeah, well, that's a classic debate is, will artificial intelligence be largely mimicking human intelligence in the way that biological brains work, or is it going to be its own completely different thing because it's more efficient to not attempt to in the digital in silicon replicate biological processes? Yeah,
I think that I think it would have to be some kind of a hybrid where, if you imagine you had your brain, but you could also have a photographic memory of a lot of the stuff that's happened to you, you'd be much more powerful in that sense. But you also want to have a fuzzy memory of a lot of things too, which is helpful in other ways. It's helpful in terms of making analogies, which is one of the basic
to one of our early topics.
Overfitting
and underfitting.
Well, no, but just finding analogies. I think I'm more thinking about. I mean, yes, it's all related, but I'm more thinking about the one where how analogies is the making analogies is kind of the foundation of scientific knowledge. Of even though it's not science to say, well, A is to B, so C is to D, and therefore this is more likely to be true. I mean, that's not necessarily a science experiment.
Scientific proof, but that's where you get hypotheses from.
That's the basic. Yeah, and actually data is just a large version of that. It's essentially that's kind of a building block of scientific data is kind of the way I look at it.
Cool. Well, so
we have two topics today. One is lighter and more like maybe a little bit political, but not too political. And the other is more statistical. We're talking about Bayesian priors later. Bayesian priors are very interesting things.
So one current eventsy and one evergreen.
Okay. So why don't we start with the current eventsy one first, because I feel like that has a wider audience. And then please stay for the prior stuff, because you never know what could happen when Aaron and I take video and audio in the middle of the night. So let's try it.
Yeah. So the first item here, our good friend Jon Stewart is back in the news.
Jon Stewart, Daily Show.
I can't remember if we mentioned this previously. I there was a period where I did actually watch the Daily Show regularly, and I knew he was coming back with a show. I don't know if we mentioned it on an episode previously, but I believe it's The Problem with Jon Stewart.
The Problem with Jon Stewart.
Very important where you place the punctuation.
That was his shtick. That was his thing. I feel like by 2015, when he retired from the Daily Show, I was already not watching anymore. But
I do remember watching some of the early Trevor Noah episodes and giving up. So I hadn't completely fallen off before he left, but I probably wasn't watching it as much.
Yeah,
and it's tough to judge when did you. I can't remember when I stopped actually watching like a DVR'd episode and just watch clips, because that's very much how I consume any sort of late night television right now. Is someone sends me a clip that says, "Oh, this is worth watching." I I don't sit down and actually watch an episode of SNL or The Daily Show. Or anything like that.
Yeah, I've done it a little bit. Well, not only certain shows. I'm not going to say which ones.
Millennialness show.
I'm not going to say which ones. Okay, so he got into a thing where it was like, yeah, John, the modern world is a lot different than it was a few years ago with his Harry Potter joke. Do you want me to go into what happened and then you could react? Or
sure. Yeah. Well, okay. I think this. So we mentioned he has a show which I think is on Apple Television.
Yeah.
But I think this particular incident happened on his podcast, which I don't know if it's partnered with the show or if it's its own thing. But both of them have kind of they both. He has come back into the media landscape with both of those roughly at the same time here.
Well, to make a long story short, he was joking around. You could get this on YouTube with some other comedians about how he didn't even say that Harry Potter is anti-Semitic. He just said like, oh, the guys who work at the banks are Jews in in Harry Potter. And by the way, I went to the ride a few months ago when I was in Universal Studios. The ride takes place at the bank. The bank is the ride. Oh. You're actually going down into the depths of the Harry Potter bank. Okay, what I don't really, it was just a joke. It's not really, you could see like a few tropes in there that might be connected to the way the goblins at the bank are used, but he was just joking around with that. He was not trying to be serious. And then a month later, Newsweek says Jon Stewart accuses Harry Potter and J.K. Rowling of being anti-Semitic, which is just the worst game of telephone I've ever played. But I also think it kind of speaks to what crazy times we're living in. And I don't know if we could get back to the old days where you could just kind of joke about something and then people don't take it seriously. But he had to come out in a video and say unequivocally, no, that is not what I meant. I was just joking around. I don't want anyone canceled. I don't want anyone censored. And then he kind of blamed it on, and you were a little more perceptive there because I was like, Jon Stewart's right when he came back the second time. But then I think you were more perceptive because he blamed it on Newsweek's business model.
He said, I think his words were something effective, and he did the Jon Stewart thing where he like, it doesn't work so much on a Zoom call, which is I think what it was, but where he stops and he turns to the camera and he's like, okay, Newsweek, I'm talking to you now, not to the audience. Newsweek, your business model is arson.
Right.
And I think his little words were and not the good kind of arson, which is a whole other interesting thing that I'm not going to touch on.
I miss his sense of humor, though. I feel like there's no one on TV that has any timing. I don't know. I don't understand why you could hire these people, pay them millions of dollars, and I actually see Jon Stewart, agree with him or not. I'm like, that guy has timing. The other guys don't. So
yeah. So regarding Newsweek, he is making a statement there, which I think is correct, that their business model is damaging deeply. However, there are two things that go along with that. One, this is not unique to Newsweek. That is also the New York Times business model, and any journalist outlet right now is that they're whoring for clicks, and they're trying to take the most incendiary take on anything they can. I didn't realize when that came out of my mouth that arson and incendiary, but they go hand in hand.
Very good.
Yeah, it's
done, sir.
Yeah, and it's not entirely their fault either, because if they don't do it, it's a race to the bottom. Somebody else will, and they're going to scoop them out of the market.
I would have said it's just the business model, the whole business model today, but I also think you can't ignore like societal impulses to choose a certain business model. And I think that's a big part of it too. I mean, why am I reminded of this is something that happened 5 years ago when this was all kicking off, when there was this big freak out that the Ku Klux Klan were in someone's university, and then it turned out to be like an overhead projector with
a sheet over it.
Right. It feels like that's the world now. And yes, it's trolling for clicks, but it's like, okay, what have people decided to click on? What have the people in those companies decided to focus on? And it all kind of fits together in like, we're in a foul social mood right now that it really sucks. I feel like things do change over time. We're not going to be in this forever, but it could be quite a while.
Well, so the other thing that I think is important about what he said there, and maybe more important, because from my perspective, the statement that news media is in a a business model that is cannibalistic to the propagation of truth is old news at this point. Yeah. But he was setting this up as a false dichotomy, because on the one hand, he was saying there is no way that a rational person could have seen that video of me saying those things to the two other people on my podcast and come away thinking that I was accusing J.K. Rowling of being anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
And then he was saying, that is because that is true, that causes this other thing I'm saying about Newsweek to be true, that A leads to B. And I think the flaw there is that he's wrong about the first part, but that doesn't change the fact that the second part is true. I think that
how is he wrong about the first part? Because it seems to me that if we lived in a world of reasonable people,
I think, well, I'm going to stop you right there, because that's a fatal flaw as well. We do not live in a world of reasonable people.
No, but a lot of the legal, a lot of our legal system, and a lot of our, not just our legal system, but also like our conventions are based on like, would a reasonable person think this is? Like if you're talking about harassment in the workplace,
I think we have a big problem there because, the reasonable man or reasonable person is a legal term of art, but then also we have a jury of our peers, and I would say that our peers are not reasonable people, or at least the way that juries are formed today.
Yeah,
but
the best we've got.
What I'm getting at is, how can he not expect that people are going to see the words, listen to the words coming out of his mouth, and take them at face value, and then run with that? Like, where has he been for the last 5 years?
But maybe he was just like fooling around on his podcast, which is what we do sometimes. Why can't you fool around on your podcast? Well, I don't know. I mean,
I was going to say that the bit was funny. I was amused by it, and if it had been like a stand-up bit, in front of a brick wall at some comedy club, it would not be out of place there. I think it would have worked well there.
Right.
And if he'd done that, I would have also expected that somebody on Twitter would pick it up and say, Jon Stewart was making jokes about how J.K. Rowling was anti-Semitic at the Comedy Cellar last night. And then I would also expect someone like Newsweek to pick it up and run with it, because that's how the media works now. And it has been for years. And he's out of the loop. I think this also combines with the fact that it struck me as a huge disconnect that he was saying, how could you take this seriously? I'm just a comedian, funny man. And
he used to do that back in the day too.
How can he not remember back in the early 2000s when he was the primary source of news, not for the majority of 20 to 30 somethings, but for a large minority? I'm talking 20-30% of 20 to 30 somethings, a demographic that is extremely active on social media and
millennials, which are teens at the
time. They were getting their news from The Daily Show, and I think we've talked before about comedians hiding behind that shield of, well, I don't have to be held to the standards of journalistic integrity because what I'm doing here is not journalism, it's entertainment. But you can't.
Actual journalists do that too, by the way. And their legal documents, which
there is that line between they talk about it on Fox all the time, but it's on all the networks now. What is a news program and what is news commentary, and they are not held to the same standard and expectations. But
what are the standards and expectations we have here on the local maximum?
Whatever they are, I intend to break them with abandon.
Yeah, only the highest standards and expectations here.
I think we suffer from the unwritten rule, which is I can't break the rules if they haven't been written down.
Yeah, no, we have no rules. It's great, but we try to be, we try to be at least like trustworthy. I mean, I don't know. We don't have the beauty is we don't need clicks, and we don't need we don't have someone breathing down our necks saying you have to do X, Y, and Z to get your funding. So we could just say what we want, which in one case for some people could be very dangerous, but also for us, like, okay, I want to be at least. I hope people understand when I'm kidding around and when I'm serious. We do have a little bit of both of that here. But I feel like we have a very smart audience. They understand.
But you have to be prepared for people to take that out of context.
Sure, it can happen.
And not get and not be shocked when it happens. You can be upset because it can often be done out of ignorance. It can also be done maliciously. And you can be upset about both of those.
We're not big enough for that yet. But one day when we hit it big, it's going to be a problem.
But you can't be surprised.
Yeah.
So I didn't see that. I haven't watched his show or listened to his podcast, so I didn't see that until it popped up in the news last week when the outrage was starting to bubble. Although when I watched it, I don't think I realized that it was like a spark point for this. I thought I listened. I thought, oh, that's kind of funny. Yeah. And then I saw that he had an apology to it, which that gets into a whole nother thing about, does apologizing actually help or does it make things worse?
Well, he wasn't. He wasn't.
He was clarifying that,
right. I feel like it works better.
Not technically an apology
because he wasn't apologizing to the mob for.
If anything, he was apologizing to J.K. Rowling.
Right. Which is actually not a popular thing to do now.
Now kind of a toxic figure to be entangling yourself with for other reasons.
It's totally unjustified, but yes.
But
yeah, it's all nuts.
I'll say, so the one other thing that I don't even remember how I ended up at that, but
go on, do your rant.
I watched the clip.
I know. Look,
and then thanks to the YouTube algorithm, so thanks Google, don't be evil. They showed me other clips you might be interested in, and it was a clip from his show. Jon Stewart is as wrong about guns today as he was when he was on the air, fractally wrong from A to Z in that piece, and that really got my goat. And I am not going to hijack your show to dissect that piece.
Okay,
but I'll leave it at that.
Known. Let it be known. Jon Stewart is wrong on guns. No, he's wrong on a lot of things, but sometimes he makes his case in such a way that you're like, it's going to be a tough one to.
Well, there's a little bit
because he's very good at saying, oh, look at how funny and hypocritical this is. Even if you agree with the other side, it's like it's very disarming.
There's a little bit of Gelman amnesia going on there because when it's a topic that you know a lot about and you can see where he's playing fast and loose and doing things that you could only get away with on a comedy show, and it's less funny to you then. But when I'm not an expert in the field, it's much easier to get me to go along with the laughs and think, well, that's hilarious. He's pointing out the hypocrisy in the system.
Right. Do you remember there was a show when we were in college that came out right after his with Tough Crowd with Colin Quinn?
I don't think I ever watched it, but I do remember hearing about it.
So there are actually two comedians on that are now dead. Patrice O'Neill, and there was one other. Shoot. Let's see. Tough Crowd with Colin Quinn cast, and they're not dead because they're old, like died young. I know I don't say these things very. Was it Greg Giraldo? Right. They both died around 2010. And that was actually a very good show. And that was a show that had comedians from both sides of the political aisle that was very, and they were very pointed at each other. But they were also funny at it. It was kind of like the last time, I don't know, people said the most ridiculous things on there. And it eventually got canceled by Comedy Central because they're like, we don't do this anymore. That's one of the things that I remember that if I remember correctly, like I think it was a popular show, but it just goes to show how they really went in a different direction with the political commentary. I think that was a very like pro free speech show that even back then they were starting to turn the night, but it wasn't like, we're being censored. It was like Comedy Central is just one outlet.
I'd say Comedy Central's format has evolved certainly in the, is it 15 years?
Yeah.
Since
15 years
since we've been in college.
Yeah. Tough Crowd's been gone for 15 years. Yeah. And Jon Stewart's been gone for 7 or 6.5.
Wow.
So that's a lot of time that Jon Stewart has been away. Gone are the days of Stephen Colbert doing Bill O'Reilly. Bill O'Reilly isn't even there anymore, so I don't know what he would do. No, good thing he jumped out of that character. But
that is another late show that I have not watched anything from.
No interest.
Years.
I have no interest. Anyway, so we are.
That's not true. I did watch his Lord of the Rings 20th anniversary rap clip, which I thought was pretty good. Say what you will about Stephen Colbert, but he does love him some Tolkien. Speaking
of 20th anniversary of movies, we're going to have to do a commentary in a few months.
Oh no.
Of the movie we made in high school. That will be upcoming. All right. So why don't we shift gears a little bit and start talking about something very serious, very scientific, very statistical. You ready? All right.
Hit me with it.
I don't know why I'm making a fist. I'm like, okay, time to get in a different mood. Okay, because, I haven't talked about Bayesian inference in a while, and I've got this whiteboard here, and I'm hoping to, I don't think I've announced this yet, but I'm hoping to do some lectures online and put them out for free. And that's kind of stuff that we can't really do here in the local maximum because I can explain concepts a little bit and we can kind of have fun with them. But and sometimes the concept is related to the news item. I don't know if it is going to be today, but I really can't get into it and give people a really deep understanding of it unless I get up on the whiteboard. So hopefully we'll do that in a little bit.
It's a challenge of the auditory medium.
Right. So, okay. Bayesian inference, this goes back all the way to episode 0 when we started talking about Bayesian inference, and I've done all sorts of, I think episode 78 was Bayesian thinking. What's the idea behind Bayesian inference?
Do we still have the Bayesian worksheet on the website?
Yes, we do. So the idea is...
Localmaximum.com?
Yes.
No. Local Max Radio.
Localmaxradio.com. Got to fix that. No, it's all right. So the idea is that you have these pre-existing beliefs, and that's usually encoded as a probability distribution over what the state of the world is. You could think of a probability distribution as just assigning numbers to different things, and certain things are more likely and certain things are less likely. Then you have data coming in, and then you adjust your beliefs with the data. So it's actually pretty simple. Your beliefs before you got the information is called your prior, before, and your beliefs after you got the information is called the posterior, after. And it's like, okay, that's a great way to solve a problem. In fact, to me, it is the mathematical codification of the scientific method. So it could be used for a real scientific problem. It could also be used for a much more casual problem. So I think it's a much broader than the scientific method. And it's actually one of the bases behind how we do machine learning, or how we think about the theory behind machine learning. But it's kind of weird because you're kind of starting out in the middle of the problem. It's like, I already have these preformed beliefs. So where do I get those from? Yeah,
that's a classic question with Bayesian thinking is where do priors come from?
Right. And sometimes you actually have, sometimes it's the posterior of a previous problem. Sometimes you have kind of an intuition around it.
Or sometimes we just make them up.
Yeah. So that's called an uninformed prior. It's actually, there's a difference. There's something called an informed prior and an uninformed prior. And that's, now I'm becoming Professor Sklar. The informed prior is what you get usually when it comes out of a previous problem, where you're actually tipping the scale somehow because you know that certain things are more likely or less likely based on previous data, or based on experience, or based on intuition.
So
all of those can, so that
to give an example, if you provide a coin to flip,
right.
Would it be, given that I've never seen this particular coin before, is it an informed prior that I say, well, a coin flip, it's got two sides, assuming it's a fair coin, I would expect the results to go 50-50. Is that an informed prior, or would I need to have actual data other than that general knowledge to be quote unquote an informed
You're
prior?
Talking about the weight of the coin. And so the question is is the weight of the coin a uniform distribution between 0 and 1, all heads and all tails? Maybe it could be 10%, maybe it could be 20%, or maybe it could be any weight, but you're going to put a lot of probability on that 50% point because most coins are like that. But perhaps, perhaps there's a small chance it's double-sided and small chances, it's some weird weight that's not 50%. But it would be reasonable to put a lot of weight on the 50%, especially if you got the coin randomly from your day-to-day excesses. And so even if you flip it 8 times and it lands on heads 8 times, you're still going to think that it's a fair coin because you haven't sufficiently proven otherwise yet. Whereas if it's kind of a situation where it's some random process that produces a 0 and a 1, you might do it differently. You might not place everything at 50%. So yes.
So even though I haven't technically run a prior experiment that I'm getting this data from, that is still an informed prior.
Right. Now let's say you have some process that produces a heads or tails or a 0 or a 1, and you don't know if it's a coin. And
so it's a complete black box.
Right. And you want to form a prior now, not on the weight of the coin, but on whether it's going to land heads or tails, or whether it's going to land 0 or 1. In that case, I think that you are justified in using the principle of indifference and saying, I think it's equally likely it lands on heads as in tails. Because if you're going to say, well, there's a chance it's double-sided heads, then you have to say, well, there's an equal chance it's double-sided tails. And so, especially, maybe actually with coins, there might be more that are double-sided one way or the other. We don't know. But I'm saying if it's just some general process that produces 1s and 0s or produces 2 different items and you have no reason to distinguish between the two, then your prior over which one it's going to be, I think there's a very good case for making that 50-50. It doesn't necessarily have to be, but I think there's a very good case for that. So that's called the principle of indifference. It's a great principle. Problem is, it doesn't always quite work. There are some situations where it doesn't work. And maybe we can go into them. They're a little bit mind-blowing. One of them is the famous random square. Sometimes it's a random cube, but I think the random square is easier. It's like, okay, I have a square with a certain side length of between 0 and 1. So it's big. If you have a square, this is not exactly square, but if you have a unit square, each side is 1. It's got an area of 1. And so I have some square that's smaller than the unit square. Let's put it that way. So then the question is, what's the probability that the side is greater than a half? If you have and you're like, okay, well, maybe it's 50-50 that's greater than half or less than a half.
Certainly makes sense if we're using that principle of indifference.
Yeah, on the other hand, you could say, well, what's the probability that the area is greater than a half? And again, you could say it's 50-50 because, maybe, the area is between 0 and 1. There's no reason why, every number between 0 and 1.
Yeah, why would it not be a uniform distribution?
Yeah. The problem is a uniform distribution over area and a uniform distribution over side length are 2 different distributions over the squares.
Those of us who are astute geometrists will have noticed that there is a relationship between the side length and area, and it is not it's not 1-to-1. A 1-to-1 ratio. It's not
it's actually
linear.
If you go by area and you try to do a uniform distribution, it's going to bias towards larger squares. Because I think if something has an area of 1/2, that means it's going to be, I think, 1 over square root of 2 length is like 0.707. So bigger square than 0.5. So hopefully I got that right off the top of my head. So that's a crazy one.
Not exactly where you're going with this, but this gets to a kind of a fundamental question of doing good science, is that the challenge is not always the process of running your experiment. It's knowing what the right question to be asking is.
Right.
Should we be basing our measurements on side length or area, which informs us better in this scenario of looking at the square within a square. And
also,
you could drive in very different directions depending on kind of which aspect of this you anchor on.
Yeah. Now, also, the question is, does it change with the way I ask the question? Because if you think I was kind of stumbling over, ask the question, what if I asked you the question, hey, what's the probability that the side length will be greater than a half? Then you might thinking like, this person is the person asking the question now is interested in side length. So side length must be the main variable. So maybe that's the one we should focus on.
And presumably we've laid out this problem such that the size of the square truly is random within that unit square. So it's not like a Heisenberg uncertainty principle thing where the moment we start thinking about side length, it changes the distribution.
No. I think it's just the question of random. It's like you have to ask what distribution, and there isn't a case that one distribution is truly the uninformed one. There could be several. And now sometimes if you actually have a real world problem where this is coming up, and I'll get to this in the second example, which is a more famous example, you could actually kind of tell which one you should be using. So the real world example is a random chord on a circle. If you guys remember a circle, random chord is a line segment that connects 2 points in a circle. Now, a random point on the outside of a circle, I actually would say that there's no dispute over what an uninformed prior should look like. It's actually really interestingly, because if you talk about like a random number between 0 and 1, I could actually dispute that maybe the uniform distribution shouldn't be used. But with a circle, the most interesting thing about a circle, if I'm going to choose a random point in a circle, I feel that there's really only one way to do that, which is like, imagine if you color portions of the circle and like let's say I cover half the circle, I have a semicircle, and then on the other side I cover a quarter of a circle, then yes, it's going to be twice as likely to appear in the semicircle than it does in the quarter circle.
That seems fairly indisputable.
Yeah, right. Now, again, these priors are interesting because the idea is you're going to gather data and you're going to adjust your distribution there. And a lot of times you could pick any one of these, and if you gather enough data, it all converges to a similar spot.
Right. So given enough iterations, we will converge on what the true distribution is.
Right.
Regardless, we could run the same experiment twice using those two different uninformed priors, and we should eventually get to the same place.
Right.
Given enough iterations.
So the problem is with a random chord in the circle. Well, there are a couple ways to do it. It's like, okay, pick two random points in the circle and connect them with a line. There's no dispute in how to pick a random point in the circle. Connect them with a line. That's a random chord. Or you could say, pick a random spot inside the circle with uniform distribution, and then basically draw a radius to that point, and then the chord perpendicular to that is the chord.
Okay.
And another one is pick a random radius, pick a point in that radius, and then draw a chord that way. That all gives you a completely different distribution. That's the Bertrand paradox, which is very disturbing in some ways. On the other ways, I think if this is actually a real world problem where for some reason you're trying to figure out, I haven't run into a problem like this where it's like, I don't know what chord this is, and I'm going to gather data to figure out what chord this is. I've never run into a problem like that. But if you did, I think you would know from the real world processes that are producing this which one to use, or you might have more insight into that. But in general, there's really no insight. So
does this? I mean, I guess it must to a certain extent apply in cryptanalysis and code breaking.
So in what sense?
Well, I guess the scenario I'm thinking is you've got you don't know what the initial message is. You know what the result is,
right?
And so you don't know what the mechanism they're using to do that transformation is. Is there a way that you can? I guess fundamentally by determining what the clear text is, what the original message is, that will unveil to you what the mechanism for that transformation is. And so I'm to put that into the context of the chord, but by running your iterating your Bayesian process on this, you'll find out what the actual distribution is, and that will reveal to you which of those 3 or 4 different methods for drawing the chord was likely used, because they all have different distributions.
Right. Well, but also it could be that if you think about it another way, like you can have a, if you're trying to break a code, right, you have a prior over what the code is, and there could be tons of codes. It's very complicated. We did in episode 4, we did the permutations, right? Yep. We assumed every permutation was equally likely. That's possible. But if you're in a situation where there are several ways to do it, well, first of all, it might not actually affect your answer, because you might be gathering information and zeroing in on how you think that code was broken. And so even if your prior is a little different, it might not matter. But if you see it done a bunch of different ways, then you might get a sense of which prior is right. Or it could be you could actually create some informed prior if you have a lot of other examples. It might not be like, if you have lots of people choosing chords, they might be choosing chords in ways that are not at all like those that are not random at all.
Right.
And so then your prior would be none of those, or random, but not as completely uninformed random as we think.
Well, yeah, that gets into a whole nother topic that perhaps a future episode on what is truly random.
Right. And so I think I got into this, how much influence a bad prior can have. I have a few more examples, and then one example that's going to blow your mind about the uniform distribution and why it could really screw up. We talked about how we're eventually will converge on the correct distribution. That's the Bernstein theorem, the von Mises-Bernstein theorem. Yeah. Regardless
of what prior we initially started with, what uninformed prior. But is there a consensus or some sort of formula for how many iterations does it take to escape the potentially faulty prior, that if you chose poorly, how many times do we have to go through priors to posteriors before we've washed away that and we're more or less on track?
I think that's an interesting area of research, and I'm sure someone's looked at it. Usually also if your belief is here as my belief is here, theoretically, when things are working well, as we gather data, we come close to each other, but probably never quite meet. But
I forget what the term for that is, but there's that theory that when two perfect Bayesians meet, the end result will be that they agree on a final result. That if they can't converge, then they're not really perfect Bayesians.
Well, it's you get closer and closer without actually touching. I think in reality you end up touching because you end up settling on
that's
within
Zeno's paradox in action, right?
Yeah, but no, I think that I think that's an interesting way to look at it. But there's so many questions that you'd have to ask to even solve that question. I mean, like, what does it mean to converge?
Yeah, and it's I don't expect that there's a number that you'd be like, you need to run 6 iterations, because if there is an answer, it would very much be some sort of formula.
Yeah. And also, if you're close over here, is it the same as being close over here? Because the order of magnitude might be different. Or there's so many different questions.
I guess why I'd be particularly curious about that is that you may be in a scenario where it's not a lab experiment where we can iterate and iterate and iterate, almost infinitely. I may be in some real world scenario where I can only iterate on this like 3 times,
right?
And so having a bad prior could potentially be much more impactful. I guess getting a concept for how if maybe I could run it a 4th time, and that it would be really expensive to me in terms of whatever resource to run it that 4th time. But if that 4th time, if I think that that's going to be able to counteract a potentially bad prior, then it might be worth it, even if it's extremely expensive to do. I'm not expecting you to have an answer there, but just where my mind was cranking to.
I feel like there's a lot of research involved in that, and it's not really covered in the textbooks. And a lot of times in the textbooks, this stuff is often thrown under the rug. Like we just got some priors for you. It's not that important. In reality, it could be important, especially if you're trying to explain a result and there's all this like foundational stuff in relation to your result. People start asking questions. You know, you want to have good answers for this. So here's a good thought experiment. Not multidimensional. I'll get into that. So two things. First, the thought experiment. Okay. You want to know whether the next card is going to be, I don't know, pick two colors, blue or red.
Okay.
And let's say I only have blue or red cards. You know this. And so your distribution is only one card is going to be picked. You're not doing a prior over the distribution of the deck, although you could. You're only doing the distribution of the top card. What would be your prior on what that top card should be?
So I don't have any knowledge about how many cards there are on the deck and how many red and blue. I just know that you're going to draw a card and it's either going to be red or blue.
Right. This is not hard. Not a trick question.
I would presumably go with a 50-50.
Yes.
You know, it's uniform over those two values. That's my uninformed prior.
It's pretty good. And also, if you made a prior over what the deck looks like, and that's going to be much more complicated because first of all, you don't know how many cards are in the deck. And then you'd be like, okay, here's a deck with, let's say 52 cards. Here's a deck with all red, 1 blue, 2 blue, 3 blue. You go through the whole thing. And, but you think that would be more or less symmetrical and kind of whatever you come up with and kind of even out and get to 50-50, which is weird because you're like, I don't know exactly how I'd assign those, but I know that when I add them all up, it's going to be 50-50, which is another very strange thing that you get when you run through all these examples in your mind. Okay, so here's something else that happens. Let's say I'm like, okay, actually, the blue cards are just solid blue, but the red cards have this little circle in the middle, and that little circle could either be white or black. So now, what is your probability that the top card is blue versus red with a little white dot versus red with a little black dot?
So I'm
smiling now.
I'm hearing Monty Hall playing in the back of my head because my first instinct is to say, okay,
but
so
this is not a real problem. Well, the difference between this problem and a problem like Monty Hall and a lot of problems that you're familiar with is this is not a math problem where there's an answer. Coming up with a prior is a very different type of question where it's like, you know, I'm just trying to find a baseline belief that kind of works. And so it's a lot more difficult. I feel like sometimes people try to use the whole, oh, this is a word problem and I can do the algorithm and calculate the answer. It doesn't work as well here. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so
this should be blowing your mind back at home.
Because we've anchored already on my 50-50 scenario of red versus blue, then I what did we say? There's solid blues and then the reds have the two variants.
Yes.
So the one path is I keep blue at 50%.
Right.
And then I say that for red, there's 25% with the white dot and 25% with the black dot.
Right.
Alternatively, I could throw out that prior because we haven't used it. There's no reason for me to believe that more than starting out completely uninformed.
Right.
And do a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 distribution.
Right. Both answers are legitimate, and there's really no way to get. Now, you don't quite have. So 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 is legitimate. But you don't quite have principle of indifference because there's an analogy between the two red cards that don't exist with the blue card. So it kind of breaks, it breaks indifference a little bit. And so you'd also be justified in trying to move it around a little bit. Like you said, maybe it's 50, 25, 25, maybe it's a third, maybe it's somewhere in between. I don't know. All of that would be justified, and there's really no answer there. Now, all of this is, I think we've said this in a previous thing, you don't want to make something close to zero, so you want to be kind of open to everything. And so in all of those cases, you're open to everything, and no matter what the information comes in. Now, normally we think you flip over the card and you get the whole information at once over what it is, but in a Bayesian problem, usually you somehow gather evidence very slowly as to what that top card is, which it's hard to kind of figure out what that would look like in this case. But
the analogy breaks down a little bit there.
Yeah. Or maybe it's like, okay, I'm going to show you the top card, and there's like a 5% chance it's actually the top card, and 95% chance is another card in the deck. And then if I keep doing that, you'll start to get a sense of what it might be. But yeah, all of those are justified, and all of those would actually work if you gather that kind of information. So, but it's not satisfying, is it? Not satisfying at all.
Perhaps this is why they don't teach that so much, because a test question where there is no wrong answer and you just have to give an explanation, or maybe you don't even have to give an explanation, doesn't work very well in the traditional model.
Well, if you assign something 0 or something with an order of magnitude that's unbelievably small, then it will break down if that's actually the right answer.
That actually makes me think
of... But we have to assign zeros sometimes.
This makes me think of Metaculus, which I don't know if you've been having this experience, but with the new year, a whole lot of predictions have been resolved.
Oh yeah, I got a few. I don't remember which one I got, but
someone was discussing. Well, wouldn't it be a cool feature if after you've unlocked a certain level on Metaculus, that it'll let you make a prediction of less than 1%?
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's what I'm going to get to in a little bit. It's more of like an order of magnitude situation.
Oh, I remember what it was. It was specifically brought up in the context of, I don't think we've talked about this even off the air.
Yeah.
But is it a Chinese rover that's on the moon right now?
I don't know.
And I think they spotted something. And it was this rectangular looking structure, and everyone was all excited. Like, what could that be on I could be messing this. Maybe it was even Mars, but what could that be that looks unnatural? What could it possibly be? Is it signs of aliens on this extraterrestrial body? And so people were putting predictions on it being something not a non-natural, non-organic object. Spoiler alert, it turns out it was just a rock.
Yeah.
And it was at such a distance that the resolution was making it seem much more pixelated and boxy than it actually is.
Right.
But there were a bunch of people who had put in predictions.
By the way,
I think 1% chance that it's not a natural occurring object. And they said, there's realistically, I think there's a much less than 1% chance.
Right.
But the mechanism here doesn't allow me to put a lower Bayesian probability.
And notice, and we'll get to this in a little bit, you might want to do 0.1%. But when you get to the middle of that point, you don't care if your prediction is 50% or 50.1%. So notice that this kind of resolution only matters on the small end of the scale or the big end of the scale. And that's very important. By the way, I got some points for Bitcoin prediction. So good on me for that. Unfortunately, I didn't trade on that as well as I could have.
Well, that is the big complaint about Metaculus, is that there's no money riding on it. So people can... We're playing for points. That what is it? Whose line is it anyway? The points don't matter.
Right. Yeah. So let's talk about the uniform distribution, which is people like, okay, well, no one can dispute the uniform distribution. Like, if I want to pick a number between 0 and 1, and I have a line segment in there that's a certain length, and I have another line segment in there that's, let's say, twice as big, it's going to be twice as likely to fit in the one that's twice as big than the one that's less big.
That seems pretty reasonable.
That's
but I assume you're going to tell me why that isn't.
Right. And it actually works on the circle, but it doesn't work on the line segment. Okay. So uniform distribution, right? Maybe it works on a line segment. Maybe it works on a square. Maybe it works on a cube, right? The problem is, as you increase the number of dimensions, weird stuff starts to happen that makes you think, this is really bad, this uniform distribution. And what ends up happening is, okay, so there's a hypercube, right? That is a n-dimensional cube. Now, don't start thinking of people of more than 3 dimensions. Hurt your brain. Don't try to do that.
Or of that horror movie, Hypercube.
Right. No, all you have to do for the hypercube is think, okay, I've got... let's say I have 10 dimensions. What you have is 10 numbers between 0 and 1. That's it. All right. Now, the hypersphere is basically I square all them. Do they add up to 1 or not, or less? Then they're inside the hypersphere, inside the hypercube. So in other words, there's a sense of if you're inside the hypersphere, you're kind of in the middle there, where you're close to 50%, or you're somewhere around there. You're close to the middle of the square, the middle of the cube, or the middle of the hypercube, or whatever. That's the circle, right?
Okay.
The problem is that if you use the uniform distribution, eventually it becomes exceedingly, as the number of dimensions go up, it becomes exceedingly improbable if you use the uniform distribution that you're in one of those corners of the square outside the. And the problem is that the big problem with that is that a lot of cases, like the corners are where you find the solutions. And so you're essentially shrinking that down to 0, which could be a big problem. So, and this is the case in probabilities too. You actually see a lot of probabilities that are close to 0% or close to 100%, but you don't see a lot of you see some probabilities that are 50, but you see a lot more time people saying 99%, 1%, 99.9%, something like that. So, and then as you get to hypercubes or or probability simplexes, which is a big topic on the website. That's the biggest search that people come for the website for, which I was not going to try to explain, but and because it's such a big search for the website, maybe I'll do that on the whiteboard someday. But yeah, if you use uniform distribution in multiple dimensions, you're actually removing very important solutions that would be an exceedingly too high.
So
number.
that raises the question.
Yeah. And then that kind of makes you, even if like the uniform distribution kind of works on a line segment, it kind of makes you think, maybe that's not the most natural one.
Well, so the more dimensions, the less applicable the uniform distribution becomes.
Right.
How do I know, though, that if I'm looking at a two-dimensional problem, how do I know that it's really just a two-dimensional problem, that there's not a third, fourth, fifth, nth dimension that is applicable here, and I'm just not considering it? And so
it depends on what
it should be coming into play, and that's why the normal distribution doesn't work as well as I
uniform.
think it should here.
You said normal, uniform.
The uniform, excuse me.
Very precise with the language here. No, there's a big difference.
Words mean things.
Yeah.
So should I always be worried about phantom dimensions that I'm not considering that are making this inapplicable? Or
I think, it depends on, so this is your solution space. So it's whatever that happens to be. I think not. I think that it's not the fact that those dimensions exist or not. It's just the fact that it's kind of disturbing, the fact that when you scale it up like that the uniform doesn't work, which then gives arguments for, hey, maybe the uniform distribution will still work on those small dimensions and you could use it, but maybe it's not the most natural way to go, because if it doesn't work over here, if it doesn't work over here and then it happens to work over here, maybe there's an argument for it not being a natural. In fact, some people have used something called a beta distribution with for the line segment, a random number between 0 and 1, with parameters half. Basically, it's like a U shape, and so a little bit more probability is towards the edges. It could still be in the middle, and so that's kind of a distribution that is that's often considered. Does that scale up either? I don't know. That's, I think, like the maximum entropy or something. I don't know, but or minimum entropy. I don't know. There's some kind of rule that gets you there.
Well, I've not done my reading on entropy.
No. Yeah, we don't have to get into that right now. But I'm just saying, like, it's a little disturbing that, not disturbing, but it's also like something to keep in mind. Like, hey, uniform is not a magic bullet.
Well, it brings to mind. Less abstract, perhaps, but some things in physics, like when look at Newtonian equations that, that you could say, well, they apply to this part of the problem space.
Right.
But if you move beyond this area, it either I can't remember whether it kind of gracefully disintegrates or if it just completely falls apart once you cross a certain line there.
Right.
And so, yeah, it definitely raises questions about, if we can only use it in a very in a prescribed subset of scenarios, is it a universal, a theory or approach here? And what else are we missing if there are those limitations?
Right. Another one that I've thought about, and again, this is just my thoughts, is that if you're talking about a random number between 0 and 1, and I don't know the problem yet, and maybe this is bringing some personal experience into this, so maybe it's informed, but it's still kind of uninformed because I really don't know what the problem is yet. I would think that I would put higher probability on solutions that are at kind of rational numbers with small ratios, like 1/2, 1/3, 2/3, 0 and 1, 1/4, 1/5, 4/5, something like that. Like, I feel like...
Now, is this because you suspect that a human is coming up with this value, and we're much more likely to pick kind of clean numbers?
Physics too, natural, and science too. There's a lot of natural, not all of them, but I'm saying like there are a lot of natural processes which are actually ratios of whole numbers, and that
although pi would suggest. I'm not saying
that
is a natural irrational value,
right? But so first of all, I'm saying this is yes. You could actually have a scientific. It's not a mathematical question, a scientific method where the answer is pi because there's some circle in there. But
well, and
then maybe
citing an exception does not disprove the validity of your approach.
Maybe some ratio with pi. Like,
now I'm hungry.
Yeah, like 3 over pi. Maybe that has a higher probability than some other rational number, or 1 over e. Maybe has a higher ration. Maybe has some probability should be on there. So yes, I think that there are some there could be some very oddly shaped priors that you could make based on the fact that these particular ratios happen to come up more in nature than others. And so that's kind of disturbing. Now you have a really strange kind of a prior there.
Is there a name for that type of prior?
No, I've never seen it.
There's not the natural distribution.
I've never seen it. It would be interesting to try to come up with it. I feel like, maybe it should be baseline. It's also, then we get into the distinction between real numbers or irrational numbers and rational numbers, which makes sense to a mathematician. But when you're talking about something in the natural world that you're measuring, there's really no distinction.
Right.
Or that could be, we could do a whole show on that.
Well, and it makes me think, again, going to physicists, and if we ponder for a moment a universe other than ours, where some of the fundamental constants of that universe are different, well, then that distribution would also presumably be altered as a result.
If I'm looking at the ratio between two particles, I think there's a good chance it would be some rational number, actually. Yeah, and so that could be a good example. Like what would be my prior on, and to get it between 0 and 1, let's say I have particle type A and particle type B. And so there are some weights, I don't know, and I'm looking at the probability over A plus B. So if you have the two particles together, what percentage of that is A? And so that's how you get that on a line between 0 and 1. Yeah, I think that's a good example where I'd be like, there's a good chance it's a half. That means they're both equal. There's a good chance it's a third. There's a good chance it's a fourth. I actually don't think there's a good chance there's some pi in there. But I think it might be some rational thing because we're talking about particles here in the quantum level.
Yeah.
So So that's actually a good, you just thought of that as a good in a physics example where that would probably be a very good prior. Maybe there is some irrational number that's the difference between these particles. I don't think that's what they find, or maybe it is. I don't know. I don't know physics enough, but you might know more than me. But yes, I would have some weird. There is a weird prior I think you could make, but again, I think because they expect the priors, I don't even know if they're using Bayesian inference. Oh, physics probably almost certainly are, but because they expect it to rely on the data so much, maybe they don't bother to come up with this. But
because again, as we said, once you start actually running the process here, you move away from that prior pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And it becomes less relevant.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Cool. So I think that's it for today. Usually what I do, oh, wow, we're over an hour. That's crazy. Could have divided this up into 2 episodes. Usually we try to come up with some kind of
a theme, a takeaway,
a theme. Like what does Jon Stewart have to do with priors?
Well,
no,
his priors on what the public reaction were going to be to the statements he made certainly seemed to be less accurate than he would have liked.
Right. And I also think the prior of the audience in terms of, is this a call for cancellation or a call for the lynch mob, is very, very high these days, and something to keep in mind.
Well, let's hope that all parties involved have updated their priors, that they've taken the posteriors and they're going to plug them into their next analysis.
It's going to take a long time, Aaron, but hopefully we'll help them through it here in the local maximum. All right, that's all I've got for today. We call this closed. Got anything else?
Calling it.
All right. Have a great week, everyone. That's the show. To support the Local Maximum, sign up for exclusive content and our online community at maximum.locals.com. The Local Maximum is available wherever podcasts are found. If you want to keep up, remember to subscribe on your podcast app. Also, check out the website with show notes and additional materials at localmaxradio.com. If you want to contact me, the host, send an email to localmaxradio@gmail.com. Have a great week.
Feel the power.